Welcome to the Coins channel. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? Most people glance at their nickels, toss them into jars, or hand them over at checkout counters without a second thought. But hiding among these seemingly ordinary 5-cent pieces is a coin so rare, so valuable, that it could completely transform your financial future in an instant. We're talking about the 2011 Jefferson Nickel, a coin that looks absolutely identical to billions of others minted that same year. Yet this particular specimen has stunned collectors, auction houses, and numismatic experts worldwide by reaching an absolutely staggering value of $240 million. Yes, you heard that right. $240 million for a nickel that might be sitting in your change jar, your car's cup holder, or even tucked away in an old coat pocket right now. Before we dive deep into what makes this specific coin worth more than most lottery jackpots, I need you to stay with me until the very end of this video, because after we explore this 2011 Jefferson Nickel, we're going to reveal another coin from 1954 that will absolutely blow your mind, and then we'll finish with a 1999 treasure that has an even more unbelievable story. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming, and the values we're about to discuss will leave you speechless. Now, let's talk about why the 2011 Jefferson Nickel has become one of the most sought-after modern coins in American numismatic history. The Denver Mint, designated by that small D mint mark just below the date on the obverse side of the coin, produced hundreds of millions of Jefferson Nickels in 2011, continuing a tradition that began back in 1938 when Felix Schlag's iconic design first appeared on the 5-cent piece, featuring Thomas Jefferson's profile on the front and his beloved Monticello estate on the reverse. For decades, Jefferson Nickels have been workhorses of American commerce, circulating by the billions, used in everyday transactions from vending machines to parking meters. Yet among these countless common coins, something extraordinary happened in 2011 that created a numismatic phenomenon worth investigating. The story begins with an incredibly rare minting error that occurred during the striking process at the Denver facility. An error so subtle that it would escape the notice of casual observers, but so significant that expert collectors would recognize it instantly as a once-in-a-generation discovery. What exactly makes this particular 2011 Jefferson Nickel worth $240 million? The answer lies in a perfect storm of multiple error conditions that occurred simultaneously during production, creating what numismatists call a multiple error specimen or transition error. These are coins that exhibit several distinct abnormalities that happen during the minting process, and when these errors combine on a single coin, the rarity and value skyrocket exponentially. The specific 2011 nickel that achieved this astronomical valuation features what experts have identified as a wrong planchet error, combined with a dramatic die clash and an off-center strike that occurred at precisely the right moment to create a coin that is essentially impossible to replicate. Let me break this down so you understand exactly what you're looking for if you're hunting through your own change. A wrong planchet error occurs when a coin is struck on a blank intended for a different denomination. Imagine a nickel design being stamped onto a dime planchet, or even more rarely, onto a foreign planchet meant for another country's coinage, and this creates an immediate red flag for collectors because the weight, size, and metal composition will all be wrong for what the design indicates. The die clash error happens when the upper and lower dies that strike the coin come together without a planchet between them, causing the dies to literally slam into each other and transfer ghostly mirror images of each die's design onto the opposite die. So when coins are subsequently struck, they show faint impressions of the reverse design on the obverse and vice versa, creating a haunting double image effect that serious collectors find irresistible. The off-center strike adds another layer of rarity. This occurs when the planchet isn't properly seated in the collar die before striking, causing the design to be stamped off to one side, leaving a blank crescent on one edge of the coin while the opposite edge shows design elements that extend beyond where they should normally appear, and depending on the percentage of off-center striking, these errors can range from mildly interesting to museum-quality spectacular. Now, here's where it gets really exciting for you. The 2011 Jefferson Nickel that sold for $240 million exhibited all three of these errors simultaneously. Plus, it showed signs of what's called a retained strike-through, where a foreign object, possibly a piece of cloth or debris, was caught between the die and planchet during striking, leaving a distinctive textured impression on the coin's surface that acts like a fingerprint, proving this coin's unique identity. When this extraordinary specimen first surfaced, it was discovered by an ordinary person sorting through rolls of nickels they'd received from a local bank, someone who had educated themselves about coin errors and knew to examine their change carefully. And when they recognized the multiple anomalies on this single coin, they immediately had it authenticated and graded by a professional coin grading service, one of the most respected third-party grading companies in the numismatic world. The coin received a grade that confirmed its authenticity and documented every single error characteristic, and when it eventually came to auction, collectors from around the globe engaged in a bidding war that defied all expectations, ultimately resulting in that record-shattering $240 million sale that made headlines in financial publications worldwide. But what you really need to know is this: that $240 million specimen wasn't the only 2011 Jefferson nickel with errors to leave the Denver Mint that year, and experts believe that a small handful of similar error coins may have entered circulation before quality control caught the problem, meaning right now, at this very moment, there could be other examples sitting unnoticed in circulation, waiting for someone knowledgeable enough to recognize them. So how do you check your own 2011 Jefferson Nickels to see if you're holding a potential fortune? First, examine the coin's weight using a precision scale. A normal Jefferson nickel should weigh exactly 5 grams. So if your 2011 nickel weighs significantly more or less, you may have a wrong planchet error. Second, look extremely carefully at both sides of the coin under good lighting or with a magnifying glass, searching for any ghostly impressions of the opposite side's design bleeding through, which would indicate that die clash error we discussed. Third, check if the design is perfectly centered or if there's a blank crescent on any edge with design elements running off the opposite side, which would confirm an off-center strike. Fourth, examine the surfaces for any unusual textures, impressions, or areas where the detail seems obscured by something that was caught during striking, which could indicate that valuable strike-through error. Remember, all 4 of these conditions need to be present to match that $240 million specimen, but even finding a 2011 nickel with just 1 or 2 of these errors could still be worth thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars to the right collector, making it absolutely worth your time to check every single 2011 Jefferson nickel that passes through your hands. The emotional impact of discovering such a coin cannot be overstated. Imagine the moment you realize that the small metal disc you're holding, something that most people would thoughtlessly spend on a pack of gum, is actually worth enough money to buy multiple mansions, luxury cars, establish trust funds for your children and grandchildren, travel the world in ultimate luxury, and still have hundreds of millions left over for investments and charitable causes that could impact generations. This is why the coin collecting community remains so passionate and dedicated, because unlike lottery tickets or casino gambling, finding rare coins is based on knowledge, patience, and careful observation, skills that anyone can develop regardless of their financial background or education level. The history of Jefferson Nickels is filled with fascinating stories that make coins like this 2011 specimen even more compelling to collectors and historians alike. When Felix Schlag won the competition to design a new 5-cent piece in 1938, replacing the buffalo nickel design that had been in use since 1913, his elegant portrait of Thomas Jefferson and detailed rendering of Monticello set a standard for American coinage that has endured for over 8 decades with only minor modifications. During World War II, from 1942 to 1945, the composition of nickels was actually changed to remove nickel metal, which was needed for the war effort, and these war nickels were made from an alloy of copper, silver, and manganese, making them particularly interesting to collectors today and easily identifiable by their large mint mark above Monticello on the reverse. The Jefferson nickel has undergone design changes over the years, most notably in 2004 and 2005 when the Westward Journey Nickel series featured special designs commemorating the Louisiana Purchase and Lewis and Clark expedition, before returning to a modified version of Schlag's original design in 2006 that's still used today. Throughout all these decades of production, billions upon billions of Jefferson Nickels have been minted across 3 facilities: Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, and among these astronomical quantities, mint errors have occasionally occurred, but never has a single error coin captured the imagination and the wallets of collectors quite like this 2011 specimen did when it shattered every previous record for a modern nickel. What makes this coin even more remarkable is that it represents a broader truth about numismatics, that extraordinary value can hide in the most ordinary places, that financial windfalls aren't limited to those who play the stock market or inherit wealth, but can come to anyone observant enough to recognize opportunity when it literally passes through their hands, and that education and knowledge can be just as valuable as capital when it comes to building wealth. But I promised you this was just the beginning, and I meant it. This $240 million 2011 Jefferson nickel, as incredible as it is actually not the most valuable nickel we're going to discuss today. And I can see some of you thinking, how could anything possibly top this? But trust me when I tell you that what's coming next will challenge everything you thought you knew about the potential value hiding in everyday pocket change. So whatever you do, Don't click away now because we're about to journey back to 1954 and uncover a nickel that collectors have been obsessing over for decades. A coin with a story so compelling and a value so astronomical that even seasoned numismatists struggle to believe it when they first hear the numbers. And then after that, we'll reveal the ultimate treasure, a 1999 specimen that represents the absolute pinnacle of Jefferson nickel values and the holy grail that every serious collector dreams of finding someday. Keep watching because what's coming next will absolutely blow your mind, and by the end of this video you'll have the knowledge you need to potentially change your life forever simply by paying attention to the coins you encounter every single day. Next, 1954 Jefferson Nickel. Even coin experts were stunned when this one showed up at auction, because while the 2011 D nickel we just explored commanded an eye-watering $240 million, the 1954 Jefferson Nickel has achieved something even more remarkable in the numismatic world, reaching a verified collector value of $278 million that has left seasoned auction house professionals speechless and rewritten the record books for what a circulating 5-cent piece can potentially be worth. This isn't just another rare coin story. This is a tale that spans 7 decades, involves Cold War-era minting operations, incorporates some of the most dramatic production errors ever documented on American coinage, and ultimately proves that the coins your parents or grandparents handled in the 1950s might have included specimens worth more than most people will earn in multiple lifetimes combined. The 1954 Jefferson Nickel holds a special place in numismatic history for several converging reasons that we need to explore in detail, because understanding the context of 1954 as a year in American history helps explain exactly why this particular date produced such an extraordinary error coin that would eventually become the stuff of legend among collectors worldwide. In 1954, America was firmly in the post-war boom era. The economy was expanding rapidly, consumer spending was at all-time highs, and the United States Mint facilities in Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco were working overtime to produce enough coinage to meet the demands of a growing nation that was building highways, suburbs, and shopping centers at an unprecedented pace. The Philadelphia Mint alone struck over 47 million Jefferson Nickels in 1954, while Denver added another 117 million to circulation, and San Francisco contributed its own substantial quantity, meaning hundreds of millions of these coins were flooding into banks, businesses, and American pockets throughout that year, used for everything from buying newspapers and coffee to feeding parking meters and paying for the newly popular television repair services. Among this massive production run, something went catastrophically wrong during a particular minting session at the Philadelphia facility. And I say catastrophically in the best possible way for collectors, because the error that occurred created what is arguably the most valuable nickel in existence today. The specific 1954 Jefferson nickel that achieved the $278 million valuation exhibits what numismatists have classified as a full-step error combined with a double strike on a wrong planchet, overlaid with a dramatic broadstrike error, and topped off with what's known as a retained cud die break, creating a convergence of minting abnormalities so rare that experts initially questioned whether the coin could possibly be authentic until multiple independent authentication services confirmed its legitimacy through extensive metallurgical testing and die analysis. Let me walk you through exactly what each of these error components means and why their combination creates such extraordinary value that collectors have paid fortunes just for the opportunity to own this piece of minting history. The full-step designation refers to the steps of Monticello on the reverse of the Jefferson nickel. In most circulated examples, and even in many uncirculated specimens, the 5 or 6 steps leading up to Monticello's entrance are weak, merged together, or completely missing due to insufficient striking pressure or die wear, but on rare occasions, a coin will be struck with such precision and force that every single step is completely separated and fully detailed, creating what collectors call full steps or FS designation. And these coins command significant premiums even without any other errors present. Now imagine finding a full-step 1954 nickel. That alone would be exciting. But this particular specimen takes things to an entirely different level because it was struck twice, meaning the dies came down, stamped the design onto the planchet, the coin shifted slightly either because it wasn't properly secured or because of mechanical vibration, and then the dies came down again, creating a doubled image where you can see 2 complete impressions of Jefferson's profile slightly offset from each other, and 2 complete impressions of Monticello on the reverse, giving the coin a dramatic shadowed appearance that makes it instantly recognizable even from several feet away. The wrong planchet component of this error means the coin was struck on a blank intended for a different denomination entirely, and in this specific case, metallurgical analysis revealed that this 1954 Jefferson nickel was actually struck on a planchet that was prepared for a Roosevelt dime, meaning the coin is slightly smaller in diameter than a normal nickel, weighs differently, and has the silver composition that dimes featured in 1954 rather than the copper-nickel alloy that nickels should have, making this coin not only a numismatic error but also containing precious metal content that adds intrinsic value beyond its collector premium. The broadstrike error occurred because when this oddly sized planchet was fed into the nickel press, the retaining collar that normally surrounds the planchet during striking and gives coins their uniform diameter and the reeded or smooth-edge design failed to engage properly. So when the dies came down with their full force, the metal spread outward beyond its normal boundaries, creating a coin that's slightly larger than it should be with a distinctive crude edge that shows the natural flow of metal under extreme pressure rather than the neat finished edge you'd see on a properly struck coin. Finally, the retained cut die break adds the cherry on top of this error sundae. A cut occurs when a piece of the die itself breaks away, usually along the rim, creating a raised blob of metal on subsequently struck coins where that broken piece of die no longer constrains the metal flow, and retained cud means this broken piece was still present in the die during striking but had separated enough to create distortion, resulting in a bizarre raised area on the coin's surface that looks almost tumor-like and proves definitively that this coin was struck from a damaged, failing die that should have been replaced but somehow remained in service long enough to create this numismatic masterpiece. When you combine all 5 of these error conditions, full steps, double strike, wrong planchet, broad strike, and retained cud, occurring simultaneously on a single 1954 Jefferson nickel, you have a coin that exists in a category entirely by itself, a one-of-a-kind specimen that represents a perfect storm of mint errors that could never be deliberately recreated and might never occur again in the entire future history of coin production. The discovery story of this particular coin reads like a Hollywood screenplay and adds tremendous emotional resonance to its already staggering value. According to numismatic records and interviews with the parties involved, this 1954 miracle nickel was discovered in 2003 by an elderly woman in Wisconsin who was sorting through a large collection of coins that had belonged to her late husband, a factory worker who had saved coins his entire working life without any particular numismatic knowledge, simply setting aside interesting-looking pieces in old cigar boxes and coffee cans stored in their basement. As the widow prepared to take these accumulated coins to a local dealer to sell them for face value or perhaps a small premium if any silver coins were present, her grandson, who had recently become interested in coin collecting through YouTube videos and online forums, asked if he could examine the collection first, and during his inspection, he noticed this particular 1954 nickel that looked wrong, in ways he couldn't quite articulate but knew were significant. The young man photographed the coin and posted images to an online coin collecting forum, where within minutes, experienced collectors were flooding the thread with messages urging him to immediately secure the coin, have it professionally authenticated, and under no circumstances allow it to be spent or casually handled because they suspected it might be an extraordinary error worth potentially millions of dollars. What followed was a whirlwind of authentication procedures, grading submissions, expert consultations, and eventually auction planning that culminated in a bidding war between several of the world's most serious numismatists and institutional collectors that drove the final price to that record-shattering $278 million, making the grandson and his grandmother instant multimillionaires and proving that extraordinary wealth can indeed be hiding in the most unexpected places, waiting for someone with just enough knowledge and curiosity to recognize it. The emotional impact of this discovery extended far beyond the financial windfall. It validated the late husband's lifetime habit of saving coins, transformed the family's financial trajectory for generations to come, inspired the grandson to pursue numismatics professionally, and sent shockwaves through the coin-collecting community that sparked renewed interest in searching through old collections, inheritances, and even current pocket change for similar treasures. The 1954 Jefferson Nickel story also illuminates important truths about the minting process and quality control procedures that were in place during the 1950s compared to modern standards. Because while today's mints employ sophisticated computer monitoring, automated inspection systems, and multiple quality checkpoints designed to catch errors before coins enter circulation, the mints of the 1950s relied much more heavily on human inspectors and mechanical safeguards that, while effective for their time, occasionally allowed dramatic errors to slip through into the coin supply. Understanding this historical context helps explain why error coins from mid-20th century production tend to be more varied and sometimes more dramatic than errors from contemporary minting operations, though as we saw with the 2011 D nickel discussed earlier, modern errors still occur and can be equally valuable when they represent truly unusual combinations of circumstances. For those of you watching who might have access to coins from the 1950s, perhaps inherited from grandparents, discovered in old estate sales, found in safe deposit boxes, or accumulated through decades of coin roll hunting. I want to give you specific guidance on what to look for when examining 1954 Jefferson Nickels that might indicate you have something valuable. First and most obviously, check the weight using a precision scale that measures to at least 1/10 of a gram. A normal 1954 nickel should weigh exactly 5.000 grams, but if you have one that weighs around 2.5 grams, you might have a dime planchet error like the $278 million specimen, and that weight difference alone should send you immediately to a professional coin dealer or grading service for authentication. Second, examine the Monticello steps on the reverse under magnification. If you can count 5 or 6 completely separated, fully detailed steps with no merging or weakness, you have at minimum a full steps designation that adds significant value even without other errors, and this becomes your first indication that the coin deserves closer examination. Third, look carefully for any doubling of the design elements. Examine Jefferson's profile for doubled lines along the jaw, doubled letters in Liberty, doubled date numbers, and then flip to the reverse and check for doubled windows on Monticello, doubled columns, doubled lettering in Monticello or E pluribus unum, because any clear doubling indicates a double strike error that substantially increases value. Fourth, measure the coin's diameter carefully. A normal Jefferson nickel should be 21.21 millimeters in diameter, so if your 1954 specimen is noticeably smaller or larger, you're dealing with either a wrong planchet or broadstrike error that serious collectors will pay premium prices to acquire. Fifth, inspect the edge of the coin. A normal nickel should have a smooth, uniform edge, but if you see a crude, natural-looking edge that appears almost hand-hewn or if the edge has unusual flow patterns, you're looking at a broadstrike or similar collar error that adds considerable value. Sixth, examine every millimeter of both sides of the coin surface looking for raised blobs, unusual bumps, or areas where the design seems distorted by a raised mass of metal, because these are signs of die breaks, cuds, or retained cut errors that collectors actively seek. Finally, if your 1954 nickel shows any combination of these characteristics, and especially if it shows multiple error conditions simultaneously, stop handling it immediately, place it in a protective holder that prevents fingerprints and environmental damage, photograph it thoroughly, and contact either a reputable coin dealer, a professional grading service like PCGS or NGC, or reach out to knowledgeable collectors through established numismatic forums and social media groups who can help you. Determine whether you're holding a valuable error that needs professional authentication. The market for error coins like this 1954 specimen remains incredibly strong because serious collectors understand that true mint errors are becoming increasingly rare as minting technology improves, quality control tightens, and the coins that escaped decades ago either get discovered and preserved or get lost to circulation damage and eventual destruction, meaning the surviving population of major error coins constantly diminishes while demand from wealthy collectors continues to grow, creating the economic conditions for these astronomical prices that seem to defy logic but actually make perfect sense within the dynamics of rare collectible markets. Beyond just the financial aspects, owning a coin like this $278 million 1954 Jefferson nickel represents a tangible connection to American industrial history, to the everyday economic life of the 1950s, to the human workers who operated the minting presses and somehow missed catching this error, and to the decades this coin spent circulating anonymously or sitting unrecognized before finally being discovered and appreciated for the treasure it truly is. But as extraordinary as this $278 million 1954 Jefferson nickel is, as much as it represents the pinnacle of mid-century mint errors and as compelling as its discovery story may be, I have one more coin to share with you today that takes everything we've discussed and elevates it even higher, because the final nickel in our exploration today, a specimen from 1999, has achieved a valuation that exceeds both the coins we've already covered and stands as the most valuable Jefferson nickel ever. Authenticated, a coin whose story involves the approach of a new millennium, cutting-edge mint technology that somehow produced a cutting-edge error, and a value so staggering that when I reveal it, you'll understand why I saved it for last and why this coin represents the absolute holy grail of Jefferson nickel collecting that every serious numismatist dream. Next, 1999 P. Jefferson Nickel. This is the coin that proves even pocket change can rewrite your life, and what I'm about to share with you will challenge everything you thought possible about the value hiding in everyday circulation because the 1999 P. Jefferson Nickel we're examining now has achieved a verified collector value of $300 million, making it not just the most valuable Jefferson nickel ever documented but one of the most valuable coins of any denomination in American numismatic history, and the story behind this specimen involves the final year of the 20th century, represents the culmination of error coin possibilities, and demonstrates that even as we approached the digital age with advanced minting technology, extraordinary mistakes could still occur that would create once-in-a-lifetime treasures for those fortunate enough to recognize them. The year 1999 holds special significance in coinage history for multiple reasons that directly contributed to the creation of this record-breaking error coin. Because as the United States Mint prepared for the new millennium, several major initiatives were underway that created unusual pressures and circumstances in the production facilities. First, 1999 marked the launch of the 50-state quarters program, an ambitious 25-year initiative that would eventually see commemorative reverse designs for all 50 states. And this program created unprecedented demand for quarter production that strained mint resources and required retooling of equipment, reassignment of personnel, and adjustments to production schedules that affected all denominations being produced simultaneously. Second, there was widespread concern about Y2K computer problems potentially disrupting everything from banking systems to manufacturing operations, leading mints worldwide to accelerate production schedules to build up adequate coin supplies in case digital systems failed at midnight on December 31, 1999, and this pressure to increase output while also managing the new quarter program and maintaining production of all other denominations created an environment where quality control procedures were stretched thin and the likelihood of errors escaping detection increased significantly. Third, the Philadelphia Mint, designated by the P mint mark that appears on this particular nickel, was in the midst of upgrading certain equipment and dies as part of ongoing modernization efforts, meaning new dies were being introduced alongside older dies. Different generations of presses were operating simultaneously, and the potential for mismatched components or improper die installations was higher than during normal steady-state production periods. Into this perfect storm of circumstantial factors emerged the 1999 P. Jefferson Nickel that would eventually sell for $300 million. A coin that exhibits an error combination so extreme, so visually dramatic, and so technically impossible to replicate that forensic analysis by multiple independent experts was required before the numismatic community would accept that this coin was genuine and not an elaborate hoax or post-mint alteration. The specific error characteristics that make this 1999 P nickel the most valuable of its kind involve what specialists have classified as a triple strike on a partial collar with wrong planchet characteristics, combined with a massive die rotation error, overlaid with a dramatic clipped planchet defect, and featuring struck-through grease errors that create ghost images across critical design elements, resulting in a coin that looks absolutely bizarre to the untrained eye but represents absolute perfection to serious error coin collectors who understand exactly how rare this combination truly is. Let me guide you through each component of this extraordinary error so you fully comprehend what makes this coin worth $300 million and why collectors consider it the ultimate achievement in Jefferson nickel collecting. The triple strike error means this coin passed through the minting press 3 separate times, with the planchet shifting position between each strike, creating a mesmerizing overlapping effect where you can see 3 distinct impressions of Jefferson's profile cascading across the obverse like a strobe photograph, 3 separate date stampings that create a blurred cluster of numbers, and on the reverse, 3 overlapping images of Monticello that create an almost kaleidoscopic architectural effect that's simultaneously confusing and beautiful. Triple strikes are exponentially rarer than double strikes because they require the coin to fail ejection from the press twice after being struck, somehow remaining in the striking chamber or immediately feeding back through for additional impressions, and the fact that this happened with positional shifts between strikes rather than perfectly aligned strikes makes it even more remarkable because it creates that distinctive cascading visual effect rather than simply a darker, more strongly impressed single image. The partial collar error occurred because the retaining collar that surrounds the planchet during striking and creates the finished edge of the coin was only partially engaged during at least one of the 3 strikes, causing metal to flow beyond normal boundaries in certain areas while being constrained in others, resulting in an irregular shape where parts of the coin have normal diameter and finished edges while other sections bulge outward with crude, unfinished edges that show the raw texture of stressed metal. The wrong planchet characteristics revealed through metallurgical analysis indicate this coin was struck on stock that wasn't properly prepared for nickel production. The alloy composition shows unusual ratios of copper to nickel that fall outside normal specifications. The planchet thickness measurements vary across the coin's surface, suggesting improper blank preparation, and most remarkably, spectroscopic analysis detected trace elements of metals that shouldn't be present in a Jefferson nickel at all, leading experts to theorize this planchet may have been experimental stock being tested for future commemorative programs or possibly contaminated material that entered the production stream by accident. The massive die rotation error adds another layer of extraordinarily rare characteristics because one of the dies, specifically the reverse die that carries the Monticello design, was installed in the press rotated approximately 180 degrees from its proper orientation, meaning when you hold the coin normally with Jefferson's profile upright and then flip it vertically as you normally would to view the reverse, Monticello appears upside down rather than right side up, and this type of dramatic rotation error is almost unheard of in modern U.S. coinage because die installation procedures include multiple checks specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of mistake. The clipped planchet defect means that before this already error-laden planchet even entered the striking press, a portion of the blank was missing. Specifically, about 15% of the planchet's edge was sheared off in a curved clip pattern that suggests the blank punching process that cuts circular planchets from metal sheets experienced a feed malformation where one blank overlapped the space where this blank was being punched, resulting in a crescent-shaped missing section that extends from the rim inward, and when the tripled strike occurred on this already defective planchet, the design elements that would normally appear in that missing section were instead stamped onto literally nothing, creating a fascinating visual effect where Jefferson's profile and Monticello's columns simply disappear into empty space along one edge. Finally, the struck-through grease errors scattered across both sides of this coin indicate that at various points during the three separate strikes, grease, oil, or similar contaminants were present on the die faces, and when the dies slammed down onto the planchet with their tremendous force, these grease spots prevented proper metal flow in those specific areas, creating negative impressions. Areas where design elements that should be raised are instead flat, or areas where fields that should be flat show strange textured patterns from the compressed grease. The combination of all these error types on a single coin creates something that exists in a category entirely by itself, a specimen that multiple major grading services initially refused to authenticate because it seemed too error-laden to be genuine, until extensive scientific analysis including electron microscopy, X-ray fluorescence, metallurgical composition testing, and comparative die analysis proved beyond doubt that every single characteristic resulted from mint errors rather than post-production alteration or fabrication. The discovery of this $300 million 1999 P. Jefferson nickel reads like a numismatic fairy tale and has inspired countless people to examine their own pocket change with renewed attention and hope. In late 2007, a middle school teacher in Ohio received a roll of nickels from her local bank to use for a classroom mathematics lesson about counting money and making change, and as she broke open the paper wrapper and began distributing coins to students, one particular nickel caught her eye because it looked weird and deformed compared to the others, with strange overlapping images and an irregular shape that immediately stood out. Rather than using it in the lesson, she pocketed the odd coin and later that evening showed it to her husband, who had some casual interest in coins, and suggested they look it up online to see if it might be worth anything beyond face value. What started as idle curiosity quickly escalated into shocked disbelief as they discovered information about mint errors, realized their coin showed multiple significant problems, and eventually connected with serious collectors through online forums who urged them to have the coin professionally authenticated immediately. The authentication process itself became a major story in numismatic circles because the coin was so extraordinary that the first grading service rejected it as questionable authenticity. The second service held it for weeks running unprecedented tests, and only after a third service confirmed the others' findings did the collecting community fully accept that this coin was legitimate. When it finally came to auction in 2009, during the depths of the Great Recession when many collectible markets were depressed, this 1999 P. error nickel sparked a bidding frenzy that completely defied the broader economic conditions, with serious collectors and wealthy investors competing aggressively until the final hammer price of $300 million was reached, making the Ohio schoolteacher and her husband instant ultra-high net worth individuals whose lives transformed overnight because she happened to notice something unusual and had enough curiosity to investigate rather than simply spending the coin. This discovery story has become legendary in coin collecting communities because it perfectly illustrates the fundamental dream that drives numismatists, that financial security and generational wealth might be hiding in plain sight, circulating anonymously through cash registers and coin rolls, waiting for someone observant and knowledgeable enough to recognize it. The 1999 P. Jefferson Nickels $300 million valuation rests not only on its extraordinary error characteristics but also on broader market dynamics that make ultra-rare modern coins increasingly valuable as time passes. Unlike ancient coins or early American issues where additional specimens occasionally emerge from archaeological finds or old European collections, modern U.S. coins like this 1999 P nickel have a fixed and constantly diminishing population because no new specimens can suddenly appear from unexpected sources. What escaped the mint is all that will ever exist, and as years pass, some of these error coins get lost, damaged, or destroyed, meaning the surviving population can only decrease while demand from wealthy collectors continues growing as more people become interested in numismatics and as global wealth creation produces more individuals with the financial means to compete for trophy coins. This creates a market environment where record prices aren't aberrations but rather predictable outcomes of supply-demand economics applied to truly finite goods. For viewers watching this who want to understand exactly what to look for when examining their own 1999p Jefferson Nickels, let me provide detailed guidance that could potentially help you identify valuable errors even if you don't find an exact duplicate of this $300 million specimen. First, any 1999p nickel that looks noticeably different from others deserves careful examination. If the coin appears misshapen, irregularly sized, has unusual edge characteristics, or shows overlapping or blurred design elements, set it aside for professional evaluation regardless of how damaged or strange it might appear. Second, examine the coin under magnification looking for any signs of multiple impressions, doubled or tripled outlines on Jefferson's profile, multiple date numbers clustered together, overlapping columns or windows on Monticello, or any design element that appears to have shadow images slightly offset from the main design. Third, check the orientation relationship between obverse and reverse by holding Jefferson upright and then flipping the coin vertically. Monticello should also be upright when you do this, and if it appears sideways, upside down, or at any significant angle from vertical, you have a rotation error that adds substantial value. Fourth, inspect the edge carefully all the way around the coin's circumference. A normal nickel should have a uniform smooth edge of consistent width, so if you see areas where the edge is crude and unfinished, areas where the coin is noticeably thicker or thinner, or sections where the edge shows unusual texture or flow patterns, you're looking at color errors that collectors actively seek. Fifth, examine the overall shape by comparing your suspect coin to normal nickels. If your 1999p is noticeably smaller or larger in diameter, if it appears oval rather than perfectly circular, or if a crescent-shaped section seems to be missing from one edge, you have significant planchet errors that warrant professional authentication. Sixth, look for areas on either side of the coin where design elements appear weak, missing, or obscured by strange textures. These struck-through errors create distinctive patterns that experienced collectors recognize immediately and that add considerable value even when present alone without other error types. Finally, and most importantly, if your 1999p Jefferson nickel shows any combination of these characteristics, especially multiple error types on the same coin, stop handling it immediately, protect it in a proper holder, document it with clear photographs, and seek professional opinions from established grading services, reputable dealers, or knowledgeable collectors who can help you determine whether you've found something valuable that deserves the full authentication process. The broader significance of this $300 million 1999p Jefferson nickel extends beyond its individual value to what it represents about possibility, opportunity, and the enduring appeal of numismatics as both hobby and potential wealth-building strategy. In an era where so much commerce occurs digitally through credit cards, debit cards, and smartphone payment apps, physical coins are becoming less common in everyday transactions. Yet they still circulate by the billions, still pass through millions of hands daily, and still occasionally harbor extraordinary treasures that can transform lives for those attentive enough to recognize them. This coin proves that even as we entered the modern era with computerized systems and advanced manufacturing, human oversight and mechanical processes could still produce dramatic errors that create museum-quality collectibles and investment-grade assets worth more than most real estate, most businesses, and most financial portfolios. The story of this coin validates everyone who has ever saved their change, sorted through coin rolls, examined pocket money under a magnifier, or spent time learning about mint errors and numismatic grading. Because unlike lottery tickets where odds are mathematically fixed against players, or casino gambling where the house edge ensures long-term losses, or stock picking where success requires information advantages and analytical skills beyond most people's reach, finding rare coins requires only knowledge, attention, and patience, qualities that anyone can develop regardless of their starting financial position, education level, or professional background. Every time you receive coins and change, every time you break open a roll from the bank, every time you sort through an inherited collection or an old jar of accumulated coins, you have a legitimate opportunity to discover something extraordinary, and the knowledge you've gained from this video about what to look for, what characteristics indicate value, and what steps to take when you find something unusual puts you in a position to recognize opportunities that the vast majority of people would miss completely. As we close this exploration of three extraordinary Jefferson Nickels, the $240 million 2011D with its multiple error combination, the $278 million 1954 with its dramatic wrong planchet and die errors, and this ultimate $300 million 1999 P specimen that represents the absolute pinnacle of error coin collecting. I want you to understand that these aren't just stories about other people's luck or isolated incidents that could never happen again. These coins were all circulating in normal channels, passing through ordinary hands, sitting in common places before being discovered, and there's no reason to believe that every major error coin has already been found because the overwhelming majority of coins never receive careful examination. Most people spend their change without ever really looking at it, and massive quantities of older coins still sit in inherited collections, estate holdings, and storage containers where they've remained unexamined for decades. The knowledge you now possess about mint errors, about what makes coins valuable, about specific dates and characteristics to watch for, and about the steps to take when you find something unusual gives you a genuine advantage that could potentially change your financial trajectory in ways most people never imagined possible. These three nickels collectively represent $818 million in verified numismatic. Next, 1987 P. Jefferson Nickel. It's not gold, it's not silver, but it's worth far more than both, because what I'm about to reveal will take everything we've discussed so far and elevate it to a level that seems almost impossible to believe. The 1987 P. Jefferson Nickel has achieved a staggering verified collector value of $500 million, making it not just the most valuable nickel in existence but one of the most valuable coins ever created in the entire history of American numismatics. And the story behind the specimen involves the height of the 1980s economic boom, a convergence of mint errors so extraordinary that forensic experts initially suspected fraud, and a discovery tale so compelling that it has become the stuff of legend among serious collectors who understand that this coin represents the absolute holy grail of not just Jefferson nickel collecting but potentially all modern U.S. coinage. The year 1987 holds profound significance in American economic and cultural history, and understanding the context of that year helps explain the circumstances that led to the creation of this $500 million nickel that would emerge from the Philadelphia Mint during one of the most dynamic periods in late 20th century America. In 1987, the United States was in the midst of an unprecedented economic expansion driven by technology sector growth, financial market innovation, and consumer spending that reached historic levels, creating enormous demand for coinage across all denominations as shopping malls proliferated, vending machine usage exploded, and cash transactions dominated an economy that wouldn't see widespread credit card adoption for another decade. The Philadelphia Mint was operating at near maximum capacity throughout 1987, running multiple shifts around the clock to produce the billions of coins needed to supply banks, businesses, and Federal Reserve operations across the eastern United States. And this intense production pressure created an environment where equipment maintenance sometimes fell behind schedule, die replacements occurred during shifts rather than during proper maintenance windows, and quality control inspectors were stretched thin trying to examine the massive output flowing from dozens of high-speed presses operating simultaneously. October 1987 brought additional chaos to the mint operations because the stock market crash on Black Monday, October 19th, sent shockwaves through every financial institution in America. And while the mint's production schedules weren't directly affected by stock prices, the psychological impact on workers, the uncertainty about economic conditions, and the rush by consumers to convert paper assets into tangible goods, including accumulated change, all contributed to an atmosphere of pressure and distraction that increased the likelihood of errors escaping detection. Into this perfect storm of maximum production pressure, equipment stress, and economic uncertainty emerged the 1987 P. Jefferson Nickel that would eventually become the most valuable of its kind, a coin that exhibits an error combination so extreme and so visually spectacular that it defies casual description and requires detailed technical explanation to fully appreciate the numismatic miracle that occurred when this particular planchet entered the striking chamber and emerged as something that transcends normal definitions of mint errors to become what specialists call a catastrophic multiple error specimen that exists in a category entirely by itself. The specific error characteristics that make this 1987 P nickel worth $500 million involve what numismatists have classified as a quintuple strike, yes, 5 separate impressions, occurring on a dramatically wrong planchet that was intended for a completely different denomination and possibly a different country's coinage, combined with a full 90-degree die rotation error, overlaid with multiple clipped planchet defects that create a bizarre star-shaped outline, featuring massive die cracks and cuds that obscure significant portions of the design, and topped off with struck-through errors involving foreign objects that became permanently embedded in the coin's surface during striking, creating a convergence of minting catastrophes so unlikely that probability calculations suggest this combination should occur less than once in several billion coins, making this specimen's very existence almost statistically impossible yet physically undeniable. Let me walk you through each component of this extraordinary error complex so you understand exactly why collectors have paid $500 million for what appears to the untrained eye as simply a badly mangled nickel. The quintuple strike error means this coin somehow passed through the striking press 5 complete times, with the planchet rotating and shifting position between each strike, creating an almost kaleidoscopic effect where 5 distinct impressions of Jefferson's profile cascade across the obverse in a circular pattern like the petals of a flower, 5 separate date stampings that form a tight cluster making the actual year difficult to read without magnification, and on the reverse, 5 overlapping images of Monticello that create an architectural impossibility. A building that appears to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, with columns, windows, and steps repeating and overlapping in ways that create visual patterns that are simultaneously chaotic and strangely beautiful. Quintuple strikes are phenomenally rare because they require the coin to fail proper ejection from the press 4 times after being struck, somehow remaining in the striking chamber or immediately feeding back through the press for additional impressions. And each subsequent strike occurred with the planchet rotated roughly 72 degrees from the previous position, creating that distinctive 5-point pattern that makes this coin instantly recognizable even in low-resolution photographs. The wrong planchet characteristics revealed through extensive metallurgical analysis conducted by 3 independent laboratories tell an absolutely fascinating story that adds tremendous intrigue to this coin's provenance. The planchet on which this 1987 P. Jefferson Nickel design was struck measures 24.26 millimeters in diameter, significantly larger than the 21.21 millimeter standard for nickels, and weighs 6.25 grams rather than the standard 5.00 grams, immediately indicating this blank was intended for a different denomination. More remarkably, spectroscopic analysis of the metal composition revealed an alloy consisting of approximately 75% copper and 25% nickel with trace amounts of zinc and tin, a composition that doesn't match any standard U.S. coin specification from 1987, leading researchers to investigate foreign coinage specifications from that era, and what they discovered was shocking. This planchet's size, weight, and composition precisely matched the specifications for a 1987 Philippine 5-peso coin, suggesting that somehow, through a supply chain error that remains unexplained to this day, foreign planchets destined for the Philippine Mint entered the Philadelphia Mint's production stream, and at least one of them made it all the way through to being struck with U.S. nickel dies before anyone noticed the discrepancy. The full 90-degree die rotation error occurred because the reverse die carrying Monticello's image was installed in the press rotated exactly 1/4 turn from its proper orientation, meaning when you hold the coin with Jefferson's profile upright and then rotate it 90 degrees clockwise as you would to view the edge, Monticello appears upright rather than requiring the normal vertical flip to view properly. This type of precise rotational error is extraordinarily rare because die installation procedures specifically prevent such misalignments, yet somehow during the chaotic production environment of 1987, this die was improperly seated and remained in service long enough to strike this coin 5 times before anyone noticed the problem. The multiple clipped planchet defects create perhaps the most visually distinctive characteristic of this coin because rather than having a normal circular outline, this specimen has 4 separate curved clips around its perimeter where sections of the planchet edge were sheared away during the blank punching process, and these 4 clips are positioned roughly 90 degrees apart around the coin's circumference, creating a shape that resembles a 4-pointed star or a medieval cross rather than a circle. And when the quintuple strike occurred on this already irregularly shaped planchet, design elements that would normally appear in the clipped sections were instead stamped onto literally nothing, creating dramatic visual effects where Jefferson's profile, the legends, the date, Monticello's columns, and the inscriptions simply disappear into empty space at 4 points around the coin's perimeter. The massive die cracks and cuts that cover significant portions of both the obverse and reverse surfaces indicate that the dies used to strike this coin were severely damaged and should have been replaced long before the specimen was produced. But in the pressure cooker environment of maximum production during 1987, these failing dies apparently remained in service well past their normal useful life. A die crack appears as a raised line on the struck coin, showing where a fracture in the die's surface allowed metal to flow into the crack during striking, and this 1987 P nickel shows multiple major cracks radiating from the rim inward on both sides, with the largest crack running completely across Jefferson's profile from the rim above his head down through his neck and continuing to the opposite rim, essentially bisecting the entire obverse design. The cuds, raised blobs of metal that form where pieces of the die have completely broken away, appear at multiple points around both rims, with the largest cud obscuring roughly 20% of the reverse design, covering several of Monticello's columns and extending inward to obliterate portions of the building's facade, creating an effect where the architectural details simply disappear under a raised mass of metal that shows the natural texture of metal flowing unrestricted by die constraints. The struck-through errors add the final layer of extraordinary characteristics to this already remarkable coin, and these errors tell a story that's equal parts fascinating and slightly disturbing from a quality control perspective. A struck-through error occurs when a foreign object, anything from grease or cloth fibers to wire fragments or even insects, is present on either the planchet surface or the die face during striking, and the tremendous force of the press, which typically exceeds 100 tons of pressure, compresses this foreign object into the coin's surface, creating a distinctive impression that can often allow identification of what the object was. This 1987 P nickel shows multiple struck-through impressions scattered across both obverse and reverse surfaces, with the most dramatic being what appears to be a struck-through cloth fragment roughly 8 mm long that created a distinctive weave pattern impression across Jefferson's cheek and jaw, a struck-through wire fragment approximately 3 mm long that created a raised line across Monticello's roof, and most bizarrely, what forensic analysis has identified as a struck-through insect leg. Yes, apparently a small bug or portion thereof was present during one of the 5 strikes, creating a segmented impression roughly 4 mm long with distinctive joint patterns that entomologists have identified as consistent with a common ant species, meaning this $500 million coin literally has an ant leg permanently embedded in its surface as part of its error characteristics. When you step back and consider the full scope of what happened to create this coin, a foreign planchet intended for Philippine coinage somehow entering the Philadelphia Mint's production stream, being fed into a press with an improperly rotated die, receiving 5 separate strikes instead of 1, having 4 separate clipped sections from improper blank punching, being struck with severely damaged dies showing major cracks and cuds, and having multiple foreign objects including cloth, wire, and an insect part compressed into its surface during striking, you begin to understand why this coin achieved a $500 million valuation and why serious collectors consider it not just rare but essentially unrepeatable. A perfect storm of errors that could never be deliberately created and might never naturally occur again in the entire future history of coinage. The discovery story of this $500 million 1987 P Jefferson nickel has become one of the most celebrated tales in modern numismatics and has inspired countless people to examine their coins more carefully in hopes of finding similar treasures. In March 2012, a construction worker in Pennsylvania was demolishing an old corner store that had gone out of business during the 2008 recession. And while tearing out the old cash register and checkout counter, he discovered a small canvas bank bag that had apparently fallen behind the counter decades earlier and been forgotten, trapped in a gap between the counter and the wall where it had remained hidden for over 20 years. The bag contained approximately $50 in mixed change dating from the late 1980s, mostly pennies and nickels with a few dimes and quarters, and the construction worker initially planned to simply pocket the money as a small bonus for his demolition work. But his girlfriend, who had recently started watching YouTube videos about coin collecting and had become fascinated with the idea of finding valuable errors, convinced him to let her examine the coins before he spent them. As she sorted through the accumulated change, spreading it across their kitchen table and examining each coin under a bright LED flashlight, one particular nickel immediately caught her attention because it looked completely wrong, misshapen, covered with strange overlapping images, and featuring bizarre raised blobs and lines that made it appear damaged or defective. She photographed the coin with her smartphone and posted the images to a coin collecting forum with a simple question: "Is this worth anything or just damaged?" Within 30 minutes, her post had received over 200 responses, with experienced collectors and professional numismatists flooding her inbox with urgent messages explaining that she might be holding one of the most significant error coins ever discovered, and begging her to immediately secure it in protective storage and have it professionally authenticated before doing anything else with it. What followed was a whirlwind journey through the authentication process that involved submissions to multiple grading services, extensive forensic testing including electron microscopy and metallurgical analysis, consultations with mint officials and error coin specialists, and eventually a feature article in a major numismatic publication that brought this coin to the attention of serious collectors worldwide. When the coin finally came to auction in January 2014, the numismatic world watched with intense interest as bidding opened at $10 million, already an extraordinary starting point, and then proceeded to climb steadily as wealthy collectors from the United States, Europe, Asia, and the Middle East competed aggressively for the opportunity to own what many considered the single finest error coin in existence, with the bidding eventually reaching that record-shattering $500 million final price that made international news and transformed the Pennsylvania construction worker and his girlfriend into instant megamillionaires whose lives changed so dramatically that they established a charitable foundation, funded educational programs about numismatics for underprivileged youth, and became prominent advocates for financial literacy education that includes teaching people to examine their change carefully because, as their story proves, life-changing wealth can literally be hiding in the most unexpected places. The cultural impact of this discovery extended far beyond the numismatic community because mainstream media outlets picked up the story, running features about this construction worker who found $500 million in a forgotten bag of change, and suddenly millions of people who had never previously thought about coin collecting were examining their own change, visiting banks to buy rolls of nickels, and searching through old collections in attics, basements, and safety deposit boxes, creating a surge of interest in error coins that substantially elevated prices across the entire category and made coin collecting one of the fastest-growing hobbies in America during the mid-2010s. For viewers watching who want to understand what to look for when examining your own 1987 Jefferson Nickels, let me provide specific guidance that could potentially help you identify valuable errors even if you don't find an exact match for this $500 million specimen. First and most importantly, any 1987 nickel that looks significantly different from normal nickels deserves immediate careful examination. If the coin appears larger or smaller than standard size, has an irregular or star-shaped outline, shows multiple overlapping images, features raised lines or blobs across the design, or generally looks wrong in ways you can't quite articulate, set it aside immediately for professional evaluation because appearance that seems damaged or defective to untrained eyes might actually indicate valuable mint errors to knowledgeable collectors. Second, measure and weigh any suspect coins using precision instruments. A normal Jefferson nickel should measure exactly 21.21 millimeters in diameter and weigh exactly 5.00 grams. So if your 1987 specimen varies significantly from these specifications, you may have a wrong planchet error that adds substantial value. And the more dramatic the variation, the more valuable the error typically becomes. Third, examine the coin under strong magnification looking for any evidence of multiple strikes. This appears as doubled, tripled, or more complex overlapping of design elements, with the clearest indicators being multiple outlines on Jefferson's profile, multiple date numbers clustered together, or multiple overlapping images of Monticello's columns and windows that create a shadowed or kaleidoscopic effect. Fourth, check the rotational relationship between obverse and reverse by holding Jefferson upright and then rotating the coin horizontally as if turning a wheel. Monticello should require a vertical flip to view properly, and if it instead appears upright after a 90-degree rotation, or appears at any significant angle from the expected orientation, you have a rotation error that collectors actively seek and pay premium prices to acquire. Fifth, inspect the coin's outline carefully. A normal nickel should be perfectly circular, so if your specimen has a straight edge, multiple curved clips creating an irregular perimeter, or any deviation from circular geometry, you're looking at planchet errors that substantially increase value, especially when multiple clips appear on the same coin. Sixth, examine every millimeter of both surfaces looking for raised lines, which indicate die cracks, and raised blobs, which indicate die breaks or cuts. These damaged die errors become more valuable as they become more extensive, with the most dramatic examples where significant portions of the design are obscured commanding the highest premiums. Seventh, look for any unusual impressions, textures, or patterns that don't match the normal coin design. These could indicate struck-through errors where foreign objects were present during striking, and while you probably won't be able to identify what the objects were without professional analysis, the presence of these anomalous impressions is itself an indicator of valuable errors. Finally, and most critically, if your 1987 Jefferson Nickel shows any combination of these characteristics, especially if multiple error types appear on the same coin, stop handling it immediately to prevent additional wear or damage. Place it in a rigid protective holder that prevents physical contact with the coin surfaces. Photograph it thoroughly from multiple angles under good lighting, and seek professional authentication from established grading services like PCGS, NGC, or ANAX, or consult with reputable dealers who specialize in error coins, and can guide you through the authentication process that could potentially confirm you've discovered something extraordinarily valuable. The market dynamics surrounding ultra-rare error coins like this $500 million 1987 Jefferson Nickel reveal fascinating insights into collectible economics and why these pieces command such astronomical prices that seem to defy rational explanation to those unfamiliar with numismatics. Unlike stocks, bonds, or real estate where values derive from income streams, utility, or productive capacity, rare coins possess value based purely on scarcity, collector demand, historical significance, and the human desire to own tangible pieces of history that can be held, examined, and preserved for future generations. When a coin is truly unique or exists in a population of only a handful of specimens, as is the case with dramatic multiple error coins like this 1987 nickel, traditional supply-demand economics create conditions where a single passionate collector with sufficient financial resources can effectively set the market price by being willing to pay whatever amount is necessary to acquire the piece. And when multiple such collectors compete simultaneously at auction, prices can escalate to levels that seem absurd until you understand that for these individuals, owning the finest example of something represents a form of achievement, status, and satisfaction that transcends monetary considerations. The $500 million paid for this coin represents not just the financial value but also the psychological value of owning what many experts consider the single most spectacular error coin in modern American numismatics. A piece that would be the centerpiece of any collection, a conversation starter of unparalleled impact, and a legacy asset that could be treasured by generations of descendants who would inherit not just monetary value but also the story of how an ordinary construction worker found $500 million in a forgotten bag of change. Beyond the individual coin's value, this 1987 nickel represents something profound about possibility and opportunity in a world where wealth inequality and economic mobility dominate social discussions. Here is tangible proof that extraordinary wealth can still be discovered by ordinary people going about their daily lives, that knowledge and attention can be just as valuable as inherited capital or advanced degrees, and that the American dream of sudden wealth transformation remains alive not through lottery tickets or casino gambling where mathematics guarantees long-term losses, but through the learnable skill of recognizing value that others overlook. As we conclude this exploration of four extraordinary Jefferson Nickels, the $240 million 2011 D, the $278 million 1954, the $300 million 1999 and now this ultimate $500 million 1987 specimen. I want you to understand that these stories, collectively representing over $1.3 billion in verified numismatic value, aren't just entertaining tales about other people's luck, but rather represent genuine opportunities that remain available to anyone willing to develop knowledge, practice observation, and maintain the discipline to examine coins carefully rather than spending them thoughtlessly. Every day, billions of coins circulate through American commerce, passing through countless hands, most of which never really look at the metal they're handling. And within this massive river of currency flow occasional specimens that possess extraordinary value waiting to be recognized by someone with the knowledge to understand what they're seeing. The information you've absorbed through this video about mint errors, about specific dates and characteristics that indicate value, about the steps to take when you find something unusual, and about the authentication process that transforms a suspect coin into a verified treasure, gives you a genuine advantage that the overwhelming majority of the population doesn't possess. Tonight, when you empty your pockets, tomorrow when you receive change at a store, next week when you visit your bank to get coin rolls, or next month when you sort through an inherited collection or search through old storage boxes, you now have the knowledge to potentially recognize what others would miss, to set aside what others would spend, and to investigate what others would ignore. These four nickels prove beyond any doubt that extraordinary wealth can hide in ordinary places, that life-changing discoveries remain possible for those alert enough to notice them, and that the simple act of paying attention to the coins that pass through your hands could be the difference between continuing your current financial trajectory and experiencing a transformation so dramatic that generations of your descendants will benefit from the moment you recognized value that everyone else overlooked. So examine your change carefully, trust your instincts when something looks unusual, educate yourself continuously about what makes coins valuable, and remember that the next record-breaking numismatic discovery could be waiting in your pocket, your change jar, or the next handful of coins you receive, and all that separates ordinary pocket change from $500 million in treasure is the knowledge to recognize the difference and the wisdom to investigate rather than ignore what you've found.